Something is happening at your feet right now that you are probably misreading. The birds are everywhere. More species than usual, feeding faster than usual, not taking turns the way they normally do, overlapping, crowding, eating with an urgency that looks almost frantic. Most people see this and think the birds are just active today. It is not that. The birds know something is coming, something your weather app has not told you yet, something the sky above your yard does not visually confirm. They detected it hours ago, through a sensory system so precise it took researchers decades to understand. And the frantic feeding you are watching is the behavioral response to information the birds have been processing since before you woke up. Welcome to Bird Minds. Today we are going into exactly how birds detect storms before they happen, what they do in the hours before one arrives, where they go when it hits, and what happens in the 30 minutes after it passes that makes that window the most dangerous moment of a bird's entire day. Stay for that last part, because it explains a pattern in your yard you have almost certainly witnessed without understanding what you were seeing. Inside a bird's inner ear is a tiny sensory organ that detects subtle changes in air pressure long before humans notice anything unusual. Scientists call it the legana. As a low-pressure system approaches ahead of a storm, atmospheric pressure begins dropping, sometimes 12 to 24 hours before the storm arrives. To you, standing outside, the morning looks completely normal. Clear sky, calm air, no visual sign of anything approaching. To every bird in your yard, that pressure drop is already happening, already detectable, already being translated into behavior. This is not a theory. Researchers tracking golden-winged warblers using geolocators documented a population that abandoned their breeding territory entirely, traveling more than 900 kilometers in advance of a severe tornado outbreak. They left a full day before the storm arrived, before any meteorological warning had been issued, before any visible atmospheric change had appeared. The birds did not see the storm coming. They felt the pressure shift, and they responded to what that shift has meant across millions of years of evolutionary experience. Your yard birds are doing the same thing at a smaller scale every time a significant weather system approaches. The feeder spike you see on calm mornings before a storm is not coincidence. It is every bird in your yard responding to detected pressure change by doing the most important thing possible before conditions make foraging impossible, eating as much as they can, as fast as they can, while the window is still open. The pre-storm feeding is not just urgency, it is strategy. Small songbirds operate on energy budgets so tight that a single cold night without adequate fat reserves can be fatal. A chickadee weighing 11 grams, roughly 2 pennies, has almost no margin for error. Its fat reserves represent only a few hours of metabolic fuel at normal activity levels. In cold, wet, windy conditions where foraging is impossible, those reserves are the difference between surviving until morning and not. When birds detect an approaching storm, they do not just eat more, they eat better. Researchers observing pre-storm feeding behavior found that birds preferentially selected the highest calorie items available: black oil sunflower seeds over millet, sweet over plain seed, at rates significantly above their normal daily intake. They are not eating because they are hungry. They are loading fuel for a period when refueling will be impossible. The social dynamics shift too. Birds that maintain strict hierarchies at feeders under normal conditions temporarily suspend some of that competitive behavior during pre-storm feeding. Getting calories matters more than getting them alone. You have almost certainly seen this without recognizing it. The morning the feeder was unusually crowded, unusually active, full of species that do not normally feed at the same time. That was not a good morning for birds. That was a morning birds knew was about to become very difficult. As the storm gets close, the feeding stops, and within 60 to 90 minutes of significant weather arriving, your yard goes from unusually active to completely empty, not gradually, in a coordinated withdrawal across species simultaneously. Where they go is not simply the nearest tree, it is specific, deliberate, chosen using criteria refined over millions of years. Small songbirds move to the densest available vegetation, specifically the kind of interior structure that intercepts most falling water before it reaches the bird, while still allowing enough airflow that the space does not become a cold trap. Researchers studying storm microhabitat selection found that small birds consistently chose locations with overhead coverage above 70%, dense enough to stay dry, open enough to maintain awareness of predators, because a bird sheltering from rain has not stopped being vulnerable. It has simply added weather to the list of things it is managing at the same time. Cavity nesting species have an advantage here. Chickadees, nuthatches, and woodpeckers can retreat into enclosed spaces entirely. Old woodpecker holes, gaps in tree bark, the nest box on your fence that has been empty since breeding season ended. Inside a cavity, a bird is not just protected from rain. It is thermally enclosed. The walls trap body heat and create a microclimate that open roosting and even the densest shrub cannot replicate. If you have nest boxes in your yard that went unused during breeding season, do not assume they are doing nothing. During storms, during cold nights, during any period when enclosure offers a survival advantage, those boxes are occupied, just not for nesting. While birds shelter, they are not passively waiting. Feathers fully fluffed to trap insulating air. Body angled to minimize exposure to wind-driven rain. Metabolic rate reduced to conserve the fuel loaded before the storm arrived. Researchers found that birds actively rotate their position in response to wind direction changes during a storm, continuously adjusting to maintain the most protected orientation possible. The bird that disappeared from your feeder an hour ago is somewhere in your yard right now, running on pre-loaded reserves, doing everything its physiology allows to survive until conditions improve. But surviving the storm is not actually the hardest part. The next 30 minutes are far more dangerous. When the storm passes, two things happen that seem contradictory. First, the return to the feeder is not immediate. There is frequently a delay of 20 minutes to an hour between the rain stopping and any bird activity resuming. Most people assume the birds are just being cautious, making sure it is really over. The actual reason is physiological. Birds sheltering in cold, wet conditions during a storm need time to restore their feather insulation before they can function at normal efficiency. The microscopic hook structure that gives feathers their aerodynamic and insulating properties, the structure that has to be realigned through preening after prolonged wet exposure, takes time to restore. A bird that rushes to the feeder before its feathers are functional is flying below normal performance, which leads directly to the second pattern. The immediate post-storm window is when birds are most vulnerable to predation, metabolically depleted from sheltering, feathers potentially compromised from prolonged wet exposure, reaction times slightly reduced, and urgently hungry, which means urgently motivated to accept risk levels they would not normally accept. Predators know this. Hawks frequently resume active hunting in the first 30 minutes after a storm passes, specifically because prey species are emerging in a temporarily compromised state, driven by caloric desperation to feed before they are fully operational. It is not coincidence. It is predators exploiting a window that opens predictably after every significant storm. If you have ever noticed your feeder go intensely busy immediately after a storm and then suddenly empty again with an alarm, that's almost certainly what you witnessed. Birds returning urgently to refuel. A predator capitalizing on exactly that vulnerability. And the alarm network activating the moment it was detected. The storm itself was survivable through preparation and shelter. The aftermath requires navigating the intersection of caloric desperation and elevated predator activity at the same time. That is the harder balance to strike. So here is what you are actually watching across a complete storm cycle in your yard. The frantic pre-storm feeding is not chaos. It is every bird loading fuel for a physiological challenge it detected hours before the first visual sign appeared in the sky. The disappearance as the storm arrives is not birds abandoning your yard. It is a coordinated withdrawal to carefully chosen locations, selected using criteria refined over millions of years of birds surviving exactly these conditions. The stillness during the storm is not absence. It is your yard full of birds in precisely managed thermal conservation mode, running on pre-loaded reserves, waiting for the pressure to shift back. And the delayed, cautious return after the storm passes is not timidity. It is birds restoring their physiological systems before re-entering an environment where a predator is specifically waiting for the moment they are not yet fully operational. Every part of this sequence is information. Every behavior has a specific cause and a specific logic. And your yard is running this sequence every time a significant weather system passes through. The next time you see your feeder go unusually crowded and frantic on a morning that looks perfectly fine, check your weather app. The birds already checked something better, and they are telling you exactly what they found. Tell me in the comments, Have you ever noticed your birds going unusually active before a storm hit? How far ahead of the weather did it happen and what did you see? I want to hear the specific moment. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.